Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise tonight to detail to the House the material that was released under Right to Information correspondence. Right to Information request that was made by a member of the public for correspondence between the Director of the EPA, Wes Ford, and the CEO of TASAL, Mr Mark Ryan. These letters that were made available were between the EPA and just one company, one salmon farming company, over just one short period of time, Mr Deputy Speaker, between in October and November last year, 2019, for just a 6-week period. And in that time, Mr Deputy Speaker, there were 5 deeply concerning examples of an industry that is way too close to our environmental regulator, an industry a regulator that operates under government's policies and operates under government directives, and that is required under those directives to put industry productivity first before the environment. And that cosy relationship and that priority of industry productivity over the environment is writ large in every one of these letters, Mr Deputy Speaker. The first one I will speak to is in relation to the baseline environmental survey required for the marine farming lease at the West of Wedge Island, the new West of Wedge lease off the Tasman Peninsula. Mr Ryan asks on behalf of TASAL that whether he can introduce fish into the marine farming lease at West of Wedge before his company has undertaken the inshore reef survey. That survey was specified by the EPA as a component of the baseline environmental monitoring and was supposed to be included in the final monitoring report. But the Director says that it's okay, it's all right if TASAL puts fish in the water in January and only has to provide a report to him 30th of April, 4 months later. That's okay. That would be against the environmental licence. So just to make it legal, he'll write a new environmental licence to make sure that everything's totally by the book. Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, the purpose of baseline monitoring is to make sure that the area gets looked at and looks at the environmental state before fish get farmed there, so that there can be a true measure of the impact of the fish. But that's not what happened at West of Wedge under this government's misregulation of the fish farm industry. On the 1st of November, the report on the annual video surveys at Soldiers Point came to the Director of the EPA. He wrote to Mark Ryan and found that marine debris was present under 5 of the 6 pen bays, but he had no check of that. He was concerned about the history of marine farming debris, that every survey that was undertaken for that lease between 2016 and 19 had identified debris, that TASAL was meant to have taken the debris away, but the EPA has no checks on that. He cautioned that the debris should be removed. It's a continuing problem, and if TASAL didn't do that, he may, his words, he may require follow-up surveys of key pens to show that they had been successfully removed. This is despite the fact that we have had serious incidents of marine farm debris causing hazards to boaters and other people on the water for years. Hardly a scary and hardly a strong response from the environmental regulator. Hamilton, the recirculatory aquaculture approval application that was made there to pump water from a TASAL hatchery onto farmland nearby. That was also pointed out by the Director of the EPA in his letter to Mr Ryan, that the approval application for the Hamilton hatchery had essentially overcooked substantially the amount of pasture land that the growth of pasture in that area, and there was concerns, he says, that insufficient to adequately demonstrate that irrigation will not result in unacceptable accumulation in nutrients in the soil and will not prevent surface runoff and leaching. It is extremely concerning, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the EPA Director noted it was likely that the that additional treatment could reduce, would be needed to reduce salinity or nutrients. This is exactly the issues the community were concerned about. Salinity in pasture land areas and nutrients flowing off into the Hamilton water supply and from the Meadowbank hatchery. But the EPA did nothing strong about that, Mr Deputy Speaker. Correspondence that was tabled as part of this text messages between Mr Ryan and Mr Ford show the cosy relationship. Another example of mates talking to mates in this government. Why does the CEO of a major company have the personal phone number of the director of the EPA? Why does he send persistent messages, tens of messages over a one-day period, demanding that the director get back to him? And why does the director get back to him at one point and say, quite helpfully, that the EPA board expects to complete its assessment of the Hamilton hatchery by the end of the week, meaning the council can deal with it at its 3 December meeting? And I suggest, he said to Mr Ryan, you get Fraser to talk to the council to get it on their agenda. How is that appropriate? You know, why are we having this relationship between the director of the EPA, who's meant to be there, and Tasmanians expect him to be there first and foremost, to be regulated to look after the environment first? Instead, what we've got is this government under-regulating the EPA, and so we have, in a short 6-week period, 5 serious examples of breaches of licences, and what the director of the EPA does to promote industry productivity is just write them another one. Just make sure it all looks legal on the books, but there's nothing good about what's happening in the state of salmon farming in Tasmania.